The sound of expensive baccarat crystal shattering against the imported marble floor was the only thing that broke the deathly silence. 3 seconds earlier, my younger sister Tasha had kicked my shin hard under the dinner table, hissing through her teeth so only I could hear. "Do not you dare embarrass me, Jordan, because Brad's father is a federal judge, so try to act like you are not a failure for just one night." She smiled sweetly at her fiancé, gripping my hand with nails dug into my skin, effectively pinning me to the chair. She introduced me to the room not as her sister, but as the Help the Family charity case. Then the door opened. Judge William Sterling, a man known as the Hammer of Justice, and a man my family had spent months trying to impress, walked in. He did not look at Tasha. He did not look at his son Brad. He looked straight at me, the woman in the grease-stained apron standing by the trash can. The color drained from his face. He did not sneer, he did not scold. Instead, he stopped dead in his tracks, straightened his tie, and lowered his head in a deep, terrified bow. "Good evening, Your Honor," he said, his voice trembling with a reverence that made the entire room freeze. "I did not know you were presiding over this dinner." That was when Tasha dropped her wine glass. That shattered glass was the sound of a 20-year power dynamic crumbling instantly. "My name is Honorable Jordan Banks. To the legal world, I am one of the youngest appointed federal circuit judges in the country. To my family, I am just Jordan, the unemployed disappointment who drives a rusted sedan and cannot seem to find a husband. They mistake silence for weakness. They mistake a lack of flashy logos for poverty. In our community, appearance is everything to people like my mother and sister. If you are not dripping in designer labels, you do not exist." They did not know that while they were chasing likes on Instagram, I was chasing justice in the highest courts of the land. Before I tell you how Tasha ended up in handcuffs at her own engagement party, and why my mother is currently begging my lawyer for a meeting, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the underdog who held the winning card the entire time. Sitting here in my penthouse tonight, looking out at the DC skyline, I sip the same vintage wine Tasha tried to forbid me from touching. It tastes like justice. But to understand the sheer satisfaction of that moment, we have to go back 4 hours. Back to when I was just the invisible sister. Back to the moment my mother made the mistake of thinking she could treat a federal judge like a servant in her own home. It started with a phone call and a demand that would become their undoing. I remember pulling up to the driveway, the gravel crunching under my tires, feeling a knot in my stomach, not because I was afraid, but because I knew exactly what was coming. I just did not know that tonight was the night everything would change forever. 4 hours before the glass shattered, the afternoon sun was beating down on the pristine lawns of Potomac, Maryland. I navigated my dented gray sedan through the wrought iron gates of my mother's estate. The engine sputtered loudly, a sound that seemed to offend the very air of this neighborhood. To anyone watching, I looked like a delivery driver who had lost their way, but this was my childhood home. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I had not been back in 6 months, not since Tasha announced her engagement. I told myself I was only coming to keep the peace, but deep down, I knew I was walking into a trap. Before I could even shift into park, the front door of the colonial mansion flew open. My mother, Patricia Banks, marched out. She was not smiling. She was wearing a silk caftan that probably cost more than my car, and her face was twisted in absolute horror. She waved her arms frantically, signaling me to stop. I rolled down the window, and the humidity hit me instantly, along with the scent of expensive hydrangeas. "Hi, Mom," I started to say, but she cut me off immediately. Her voice was a sharp hiss. "Jordan, what do you think you are doing? Do not you dare park that heap of junk in my driveway. We have guests arriving in an hour. The Sterlings are coming. Do you understand what that means? Judge Sterling is used to Bentleys and Rolls Royces, not this." She pointed a manicured finger at my car with disgust. "It looks like something a criminal would drive. Move it. Now." I took a deep breath. This was the greeting I expected. It did not matter that I had driven an hour through traffic to be here. It did not matter that I was her eldest daughter. To Patricia Banks, appearance was the only currency that mattered, and I was currently overdrawn. "Mom, it is just a car," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I can park it on the side." "Absolutely not," she snapped. "I do not want the neighbors seeing it. I do not want Brad seeing it. Take it around the back. Go down the service alley and park next to the dumpsters behind the garage. And come in through the kitchen door. The front entrance is for guests, not for whatever this is." She gestured at me as if I were a stain on her perfect white carpet. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me. For a split second, I considered turning the car around and driving back to my penthouse in D.C. I considered telling her right then and there that this heap of junk belonged to a federal circuit judge who could sign a warrant for her arrest before dinner was served. But I did not. I was not ready to show my hand yet. The investigation into Brad's finances was still finalizing, and I needed to see Tasha's reaction up close. So I swallowed my pride. "Okay, Mom," I said quietly. "I will park in the back." "Good," she said, turning her back on me without another word. "And fix your hair. You look like you just rolled out of bed." She slammed the heavy oak door shut. I shifted the car into reverse, the gears grinding in protest. I drove past the manicured rose bushes and the marble fountain, heading toward the service alley where the garbage cans were stored. The smell of rotting food greeted me as I parked. I stepped out of the car, my heels sinking slightly into the mud. I smoothed down my shirt and walked toward the back door. I was entering my own family home through the servants' entrance. It was fitting, really, because tonight I was going to serve them something they would never forget. The heavy oak door swung shut behind me, isolating me in the service hallway. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and expensive truffle oil, a nauseating combination that made my stomach turn. I walked into the kitchen, expecting to find the catering staff in chaos, but instead, I found my sister Tasha standing alone by the granite island. She was not panicking. She looked calm, almost predatory, like a cat playing with a mouse it had already caught. She was inspecting a tray of caviar blinis with critical precision. When she heard my footsteps, she did not turn around to greet me. She simply reached under the counter, pulled out a bundled ball of black fabric, and tossed it over her shoulder in my direction. It hit me square in the chest before unraveling onto the floor. I looked down. It was a black apron and a stiff white server shirt still in its plastic packaging. "Put those on," Tasha said, finally turning to face me. Her voice was light and airy, as if she were asking me to try a piece of cake. "The catering company is short one server. Some girl called in sick at the last minute, and I cannot have empty glasses at my engagement party. You are the same size as her, so it works out perfectly." I stared at the cheap polyester fabric on the floor. I felt the blood rushing to my face, heating my skin. "Tasha," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I am a guest. I drove an hour to celebrate your engagement, not to serve appetizers to your friends. I am not putting that on." Tasha laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed off the stainless steel appliances. "A guest," she repeated, mocking me. "Jordan, be realistic. Look at you. You are wearing jeans that are 2 years old. You have nothing in common with the people in the other room. Brad family comes from old money. His father is a federal judge. What are you going to talk to them about? Your student loans, your little volunteer work." She took a step closer, her eyes scanning me with disdain. "I am doing you a favor. I will pay you $50 an hour. That is probably more than you make in a week at whatever failing nonprofit you are working for. Just take the apron and make yourself useful." I shook my head, stepping back. "No, Tasha, I am not doing this." I turned toward the door, intending to walk straight out to my car and leave them to their charade. I had my hand on the handle when Tasha's voice stopped me cold. It was not a shout. It was a whisper, but it carried more weight than a scream. "If you walk out that door, Jordan, I am cutting off the payments for Aunt May nursing home." I froze. My hand gripped the cold metal handle. Aunt May was our great aunt, the only person in this entire family who had ever shown me kindness. She was diabetic and lived in an assisted living facility that required monthly payments. Payments that Tasha had promised to cover, using Brad money since she controlled the family finances. Tasha knew exactly where to strike. I turned around slowly. "You would not," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "She needs that insulin. She needs that care. Try me," Tasha said, shrugging her shoulders. "Brad promised to cover her bills because he thinks she is family. But if you ruin my night, if you embarrass me by being uncooperative, I will tell Brad that Aunt May is a drain on our resources. I will have the payments stopped by tomorrow morning. Do you have $3,000 a month to keep her alive, Jordan? Because looking at your shoes, I highly doubt it." The silence in the kitchen was deafening. I looked at my sister and realized there was no bottom to her cruelty. She was willing to risk an old woman life just to assert dominance over me. I had the money. I could pay for Aunt May 10 times over with my salary as a judge, but I could not reveal that yet. Not until I had the evidence to take them all down. I had to play the game for 4 more hours. I bent down and picked up the apron. "Fine," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "I will do it." Tasha smiled a victorious grin that made my skin crawl. "Good choice, sister. Now hurry up, the guests are thirsty." I took a deep breath and pushed through the double doors, leaving the sanctuary of the kitchen behind. The noise of the party hit me like a physical wave. The living room had been transformed into a gallery of pretension filled with people holding crystal flutes and judging each other net worth based on their shoes. I adjusted the heavy silver tray of champagne in my hand and stepped into the fray. This was the part of the undercover work I hated the most. In a courtroom, I commanded silence with a look. Here I was invisible. That is the superpower of the service staff. You see everything, but no one truly sees you. I moved through the crowd, weaving between clusters of guests who were too busy laughing at their own jokes to notice the woman refilling their drinks was their own flesh and blood. I approached a group standing near the grand piano. It was my mother, sisters Aunt Bernice and Aunt Clara, along with Uncle Charles. Aunt Bernice was holding court in a sequined dress that was far too tight for her frame, loudly recounting her latest vacation to Turks and Caicos. I extended the tray toward them, keeping my head slightly lowered. Aunt Bernice reached out and grabbed a glass without looking at me. Finally, she snapped, taking a sip. "The service here is slower than I expected." She paused, swirling the liquid in her glass before her eyes drifted down to my shoes, then up to my face. She stopped mid-swallow. Her eyes widened in a performance of surprise that deserved a Razzie Award. "Wait a minute," she said loudly, causing the conversation around us to die down. "Jordan, is that you?" I raised my head and met her gaze. "Hello, Aunt Bernice. I am just helping Tasha out tonight." Uncle Charles choked on his crab cake. He coughed, wiping his mouth with a napkin, and staring at me as if I were a ghost. "Helping out?" He repeated, his voice dripping with condescension. "I thought Tasha told us you were a lawyer in the city now. Did something happen at the firm? Did they let you go?" Aunt Clara placed a sympathetic hand on my shoulder, but her nails dug in sharply. "Oh, Charles, do not be rude. You know how cutthroat the legal world is. Not everyone has the intellectual stamina for it. Some people are just better suited for simpler tasks." She turned to me, offering a pitying smile that was sharper than a knife. "There is no shame in honest work, Jordan. If serving drinks is the best you can do, then we are proud of you for trying." I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I forced my pulse to slow down. It was a technique I used during high-stakes cross-examinations. Let the witness dig their own grave. "It is honest work, Aunt Clara," I said, my voice calm and steady. "And someone has to make sure the guests are taken care of since Tasha is so busy." Uncle Charles laughed, shaking his head. "Well, since you are here, be a dear and take this empty napkin. And try to look a little more cheerful. You look like you are at a funeral, not an engagement party. No wonder you cannot keep a job with that attitude." I took the crumpled napkin from his hand. I wanted to tell him that the only thing being buried tonight was their dignity. I wanted to tell him that I had presided over a merger case involving his business partner last month and knew exactly how much debt he was hiding, but I simply nodded. Enjoy the party, Uncle Charles. I walked away as they resumed their chatter, their laughter echoing behind me. They thought I was retreating. They did not know I was just moving to a better vantage point to watch them fall. I tightened the strings of the black apron around my waist, taking a moment to compose myself before pushing through the heavy swinging doors. The transition from the sterile silence of the kitchen to the roar of the party was jarring. The living room was a sea of expensive silk suits and forced laughter. The air smelled of expensive perfume and old money entitlement. I adjusted the heavy silver tray of champagne flutes in my hand and stepped into the fray. In my courtroom, I was the person everyone stood up for when I entered. Here I was, less than invisible. I was furniture. I moved through the crowd, weaving between clusters of guests who were too busy trying to outdo each other with stories of summer homes and Ivy League acceptances to notice the woman refilling their drinks was their own flesh and blood. I made my way toward the grand piano where a group of my relatives had gathered. My Aunt Bernice was holding court, wearing a sequined dress that strained against the fabric, recounting her latest trip to the Amalfi Coast. Next to her stood Uncle Charles, swirling his scotch and looking bored. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. These were people who had known me since I was a child, yet they had not reached out to me in years, unless they needed legal advice, which I always politely declined. I stepped forward, extending the tray. "Champagne?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Aunt Bernice reached for a glass without looking up initially. Finally, she snapped, "I have been waiting for a refill for 10 minutes. She froze mid-sip, her eyes traveling from my scuffed sneakers up to the black apron and finally landing on my face. Her jaw dropped slightly. "Jordan, is that you?" The conversation in the circle died instantly. Uncle Charles choked on his drink, coughing loudly before staring at me with wide disbelief. He looked at me as if I were a ghost, or perhaps a cockroach that had wandered into a sterile lab. "Jordan," he repeated, his voice booming. "What on earth are you doing wearing that? Tasha told us you were working at a top law firm in the city. Did you get fired?" I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, but I forced my pulse to remain steady. "Hello, Uncle Charles, Aunt Bernice," I said calmly. "I am just helping Tasha out tonight." The catering staff was short-handed. Aunt Clara, who had been standing quietly on the periphery, stepped forward. She placed a hand on my shoulder, but there was no warmth in her touch, only a patronizing pity that felt worse than a slap. "Oh, honey," she cooed, tilting her head. "There is no need to be embarrassed. We know how competitive the legal world is. Not everyone has the intellectual stamina for that kind of pressure. Some people are just better suited for simpler tasks." Uncle Charles laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Simpler tasks, indeed. Well, at least you are making yourself useful for once. Honestly, I always suspected you were not quite smart enough for the heavy paperwork. Law requires a certain pedigree that Tasha has, but well, you have always been a bit slow on the uptake, haven't you?" He took a fresh glass from my tray and waved his hand dismissively. "Run along now, Don, not let the ice melt." I stood there for a heartbeat longer than necessary, staring directly into Uncle Charles' bloodshot eyes. He had no idea that I had presided over a bankruptcy hearing involving his business partner just last week. He had no idea that I knew exactly how leveraged his assets were. I wanted to tell him that his pedigree was built on a house of cards that was about to collapse. Instead, I simply dipped my head. "Enjoy the evening, Uncle Charles." I turned and walked away, feeling their eyes boring into my back. They thought they had just put me in my place. They did not realize they had just become the first defendants in the trial taking place in my mind. I had barely escaped the interrogation from my relatives when the heavy brass knocker echoed through the grand foyer. The sound acted like a starter pistol for Tasha. She smoothed her dress, checked her reflection in the hall mirror one last time, and rushed toward the door. Her face transformed from the sneering mask she wore around me into a picture of adoration. She threw the door open, and there he was, Brad Sterling. He looked exactly like his photos online, but in person, the arrogance radiating off him was almost palpable. He was tall with the kind of jawline that money buys, and hair that had been styled to look effortlessly messy. He wore a navy suit that fit him so perfectly it had to be bespoke. He stepped inside, bringing a gust of cool evening air and the scent of expensive cologne with him. Tasha threw her arms around his neck, squealing with delight, but Brad pulled away gently after a brief, perfunctory kiss on her cheek. He was scanning the room, assessing the decor, judging the environment. His eyes swept over the marble floors, the chandelier, and finally landed on me. I was standing near the coat rack holding a silver tray of empty glasses. To him, I was part of the furniture. I was a prop in the background of his life. He did not smile. He did not introduce himself. He simply shrugged off his camel-colored coat and held it out in my direction without even looking at me. Here, he said, his voice flat and commanding. Take this. I stepped forward, my hand gripping the tray tightly. I set the tray down on a side table and reached for the coat. As my fingers touched the fabric, Brad snapped his fingers near my face. Hey, he said sharply, finally locking eyes with me. Be careful with that. Do you know what this is? I paused, holding the heavy garment. It is a coat, sir, I said, keeping my voice low and subservient. He let out a short, derisive laugh. It is not just a coat. It is vicuña. It is worth more than your entire life, so do not get your grubby fingerprints on it. Hang it up properly. Broad hangers only. If I see a wrinkle in it later, you are paying for it. I felt a surge of adrenaline hit my bloodstream. It was the same feeling I got right before delivering a closing argument. The sheer audacity of his statement was breathtaking, worth more than my life. I looked at this man, this fraud, who was living off his father's reputation and financing his lifestyle with stolen charity funds. He had no idea that the woman holding his coat was currently building a federal case that would strip him of everything he owned, including this precious vicuña wool. I wanted to throw the coat on the floor and wipe my muddy shoes on it. I wanted to tell him that my signature on a court order was worth more than his entire inheritance. But I did not. I simply nodded, my face a mask of obedience. Yes, sir, I said. I will take excellent care of it. Brad turned his back on me, dismissing me instantly as he walked toward Tasha. I watched him go, my grip tightening on the coat. Enjoy it while you can, Brad, I thought. Because where you are going, you will be wearing an orange jumpsuit, and they do not allow luxury fabrics in federal prison. Tasha looped her manicured arm through Brad's elbow, her eyes darting between us with a mixture of panic and calculation. She had to address the awkwardness of her fiancé mistaking her sister for a servant, but she had to do it without lowering Brad's status. Brad, baby, she purred, leaning into him. I see you have met Jordan. She is helping us out tonight since the catering service was incompetent. Brad froze for a split second, his hand hovering halfway to his pocket as if he were about to tip me. He looked from the expensive coat in my arms to my face, and a slow realization dawned on him. The confusion cleared, but it was not replaced by embarrassment or an apology. Instead, a cruel smirk curled the corners of his mouth. Oh, he said, letting out a short barking laugh that echoed in the high-ceilinged foyer. Jordan. Of course, the sister with the career struggles. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, his cologne overpowering my senses. I honestly thought you were hired help. But you know what? He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on the ill-fitting white shirt and the cheap black apron. The look actually works for you. It fits. You look much more natural holding a coat than you ever would holding a briefcase. I felt a sharp retort rising in my throat, a blistering correction that would have silenced him instantly. But before I could speak, my mother materialized at his side. Patricia Banks had been watching from the archway, waiting for the right moment to intervene. I expected her to correct him. I expected her to have a shred of maternal instinct. But she placed a hand on Brad's shoulder. Her back turned slightly toward me, effectively boxing me out of the family circle. Oh, Brad. Please forgive her, Patricia said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Jordan has always been a bit slow on the uptake. I hope she did not wrinkle your coat. She is terribly clumsy with nice things. She looked at me over her shoulder, her eyes cold and hard, warning me to play along. We always have to keep an eye on her. She is not like Tasha. She does not have that natural grace. My stomach twisted. It was not the insult from Brad that stung. I expected that from an entitled narcissist. It was my mother. She was not just failing to defend me. She was actively offering me up as a sacrifice to feed his ego. She was rewriting my identity to fit their narrative of superiority. Brad chuckled, patting my mother's hand. Well, at least we know she is useful for something. Maybe we can get a family discount on the service tonight, right? The three of them laughed. It was a grotesque, synchronized sound that made the world feel tilted and wrong, as if the floor beneath me was sloping. My mother shooed me away with a dismissive flick of her wrist. Go on, Jordan, she commanded. Hang that up properly in the cloakroom, and then bring a round of martinis to the patio, and try not to spill anything this time. I turned away, the laughter following me like a physical weight. As I walked toward the closet, I ran my thumb over the label of the coat. I memorized the texture. I memorized the insults. I was not just a sister or a daughter anymore. I was a vault of evidence, and they had just given me everything I needed to lock them away forever. I hung the coat up with precision, smoothing the fabric down. The next time Brad saw this coat, it would be in an evidence bag. I took a deep breath, composed my face into a mask of servitude, and headed for the bar. The trial was proceeding exactly as I had planned. I walked back into the kitchen, trembling with rage, but I forced myself to focus on the task at hand. The chef handed me a heavy porcelain tureen filled with steaming lobster bisque. It was scalding hot and smelled of cream and sherry. Be careful, he warned me. That tureen is antique. I nodded, gripping the handles with a towel, and walked back out into the dining room. The guests were seated now. Tasha sat at the head of the table next to Brad, beaming like a queen who had just conquered a new territory. As I approached the table, the chatter died down slightly. Everyone watched the servant girl, trying not to spill the soup. I moved carefully, serving the guests on the left side first. I could feel Tasha's eyes on me. I could feel her waiting for a mistake. As I walked behind her chair to serve Brad, I saw her shift her weight. It was subtle, a slight movement of her shoulder. I should have anticipated it. I should have known that humiliation was not enough for her. She needed physical pain to truly enjoy her evening. Just as I stepped past her, she stuck her leg out. It was a move we had practiced as kids on the soccer field, but this time there was no ball. Her stiletto heel hooked around my ankle. I stumbled. The heavy tureen tipped forward. Gravity took over. I tried to correct my balance, wrenching my body sideways to avoid dumping the boiling liquid onto Tasha's pristine white dress. I succeeded in saving her dress, but I could not save myself. I hit the floor hard. The tureen shattered against the leg of the table, sending shards of porcelain and gallons of hot bisque exploding across the Persian rug and splashing onto my arms and apron. The pain was immediate. The hot liquid seared my skin through the thin white shirt. I gasped, biting my lip to keep from screaming. But the sound that filled the room was not concern. It was laughter. Tasha gasped, covering her mouth with a napkin in mock horror, but her eyes were dancing with delight. "Oh my God," she shrieked. "You clumsy idiot! That rug is an antique. It has been in the family for 3 generations. You are going to pay for that out of your wages." Brad shook his head, taking a sip of his wine as if watching a slapstick comedy. "Good help is so hard to find these days, isn't it?" He chuckled, and the rest of the table joined in. My mother rushed over, but not to help me. She grabbed a napkin and started frantically dabbing at the edge of the rug near Tasha's feet. "Jordan, look what you have done," she hissed. "Get up! Clean this mess up immediately. You are ruining everything." I lay there for a moment, the smell of lobster and old wool filling my nose. My arm was throbbing. My pride was bruised. But as I looked up at them, at their laughing faces and their cruel indifference, something inside me clicked into place. The last vestige of hope that this family could be saved. evaporated. I was not sad anymore. I was ready. I slowly pushed myself up off the floor, ignoring the pain. I picked up a large shard of the broken tureen. I did not apologize. I did not cry. I simply looked at Tasha and smiled a smile that did not reach my eyes. Accidents happen, Tasha. I said, my voice steady and cold. But make sure you enjoy the soup that is left. It might be the last expensive meal you eat for a very long time. I stood in the small guest powder room for 5 minutes, running cold water over my scalded forearm. The skin was red and angry, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the cold knot of determination tightening in my chest. I dried my arm with a paper towel, took a deep breath, and walked back into the dining room. The chaos of the accident had been cleared away. The antique rug had been rolled up and removed, and the guests had settled around the long mahogany dining table. The scene was picture perfect. Crystal candelabras cast a warm golden glow over the table setting, highlighting the polished silverware and the elaborate floral centerpieces. Everyone was seated. My mother sat at one end opposite my father, who had barely looked up from his phone all evening. Tasha and Brad were seated in the center, holding hands like royalty granting an audience. There was exactly one empty chair left at the far end of the table near the kitchen door. It was the seat usually reserved for the least important guest, but tonight it looked like a lifeline. I was exhausted, hungry, and my arm was throbbing. I just wanted to sit down for 10 minutes and eat a meal before escaping this nightmare. I approached the table, trying to make myself as unobtrusive as possible. I reached for the back of the heavy oak chair, intending to pull it out. But before my fingers could graze the wood, Tasha's hand shot out faster than a cobra strike. She grabbed the chair and pulled it away from me, dragging it closer to her own seat. With a deliberate theatrical motion, she lifted her oversized orange Hermes Birkin bag and placed it squarely on the velvet cushion. She patted the leather affectionately before looking up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Oh, Jordan, stop!" she said, her voice loud enough to silence the low hum of conversation in the room. "What do you think you are doing?" I paused, my hand hovering in midair. "I am sitting down to eat, Tasha. There is an empty seat." Tasha laughed, shaking her head as if I had just told a particularly stupid joke. "No, there is not. This seat is taken. My Birkin needs a place to rest, and quite frankly, considering it cost more than your car and your entire wardrobe combined, it takes priority. Besides, look at you." She gestured vaguely at my stained shirt and apron. "You are a mess. You smell like stale seafood. I cannot have you sitting here ruining the appetite of my guests." I looked around the table, waiting for anyone to intervene. My father was staring at his wineglass, swirling the red liquid hypnotically. My mother was busy adjusting her napkin, studiously avoiding my gaze. Brad was leaning back in his chair, watching the scene with a smirk of amusement playing on his lips. "But where am I supposed to eat?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Tasha picked up a fork and pointed it toward the swinging double doors behind me. "In the kitchen, Jordan. That is where the help eats. You are getting paid to work tonight, remember? Staff does not sit with the masters. It is a simple rule of etiquette. You can scrape together whatever leftovers the chef does not use and eat standing up at the counter. Now go. We are ready for the first course, and you are lingering." The humiliation was absolute. It was not just an exclusion, it was an erasure of my humanity. She had elevated a leather bag above her own sister. I looked at the bag, then at Tasha. I realized then that she did not just want to win, she wanted to destroy me. But she had made a fatal error. By sending me to the kitchen, she was giving me privacy. She was giving me access to my phone and the federal database without prying eyes. I slowly lowered my hand. "You are right, Tasha," I said quietly. "I would not want to ruin your perfect picture." I turned my back on them and walked toward the kitchen. As the doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the sound of Brad's laughter, I did not feel defeated. I felt dangerous. The kitchen was not a punishment. It was my war room, The swinging door settled into place, muffling the sound of the party outside, until it was just a dull roar. The kitchen was quiet, save for the hum of the industrial refrigerator. I leaned against the cold granite counter and looked at the meal that had been left for me. It was a basket of stale baguette slices and a small bowl of olive oil that had started to separate. This was my dinner. This was the hospitality my own sister offered me while she feasted on lobster and steak just 10 feet away. I broke off a piece of the hard bread and chewed it slowly. It tasted like ash, but I forced myself to swallow. I needed the energy. I needed the focus. Tasha thought she had punished me by banishing me to the kitchen. She thought she had stripped me of my dignity. She did not realize she had just given me the one thing I needed most, which was privacy. I wiped the crumbs from my hands and pulled my phone from the pocket of my jeans. I did not open Instagram or Facebook. I swiped to the last page of my apps to a folder that looked like a generic calculator. I entered a 6-digit passcode and scanned my thumbprint. The screen flashed black then blue, displaying the seal of the Federal Circuit Court. Access granted. I was no longer Jordan the waitress. I was Judge Banks, and I had full subpoena power right in the palm of my hand. My heart rate remained steady as I navigated through the secure portal. I had flagged the file for Hope for Youth Tasha's charity foundation 3 days ago, but I had been waiting for a trigger event to justify a deep dive warrant. Her little speech at the dinner table about needing cash was exactly what I needed. I typed in the tax identification number for the foundation. The screen populated with rows of data. At first glance, it looked legitimate, donations coming in, expenses going out for events and marketing. But I knew where to look. I scrolled past the surface-level numbers to the real-time transaction log. My eyes scanned the timestamps. There it was. A transfer initiated just 20 minutes ago, right before Tasha announced she lost her ring. Amount $50,000. Recipient S&B Consulting, LLC. I tapped on the recipient name. The system lagged for a second before pulling up the registration details for S&B Consulting. It was a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, and the sole signatory on the account was not Tasha. It was Brad Sterling. I stared at the screen. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together with a terrifying clarity. They were not just living beyond their means. They were siphoning money from donors, laundering it through a fake consulting firm, and using it to fund their lifestyle. The $50,000 transfer was likely to pay off a gambling debt or a loan shark, which explained their desperation. Then a red banner flashed across the top of my screen. Suspicious activity detected. Multiple structuring transfers identified. The system had flagged it automatically. This was a federal crime. Wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. I took a screenshot of the transaction log. I forwarded the file to the FBI field office contact I had alerted earlier with a simple subject line, "Execute warrant." I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I picked up another piece of bread and ate it. This time, it did not taste like ash. It tasted like justice. I looked at the kitchen door. They were out there laughing, drinking, believing they were untouchable. They had no idea that the woman eating their leftovers had just signed their arrest warrants. I straightened my back, smoothed down my apron, and prepared to go back out. The show was not over yet. In fact, the main act was just beginning. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and smoothed my apron. The screen in my mind was still flashing with the evidence of wire fraud, but my face was a mask of perfect servitude. I picked up a bottle of vintage Cabernet from the sideboard and approached the table. The conversation had shifted from wedding plans to politics, a dangerous subject for a family built on pretension. Brad was leaning back in his chair, holding a half-empty glass, swirling the red liquid with an air of self-importance that made my teeth ache. He was in the middle of a monologue about law and order, which was ironic, considering he was currently laundering money through an offshore shell company. "You see," he said, his voice booming enough to ensure everyone heard him, "my father, Judge William Sterling, has zero tolerance for people who refuse to pull their own weight. He sees them in his courtroom every day. People who think the world owes them a living." He paused, waiting for me to fill his glass. I stepped forward, pouring the wine with a steady hand, even though I wanted to smash the bottle over his head. Brad did not say thank you. He did not even look at me. He continued talking, his eyes flicking toward me with a sneer. Dad always says the system is broken because we are too soft. We let people slide. We let them live off the hard work of taxpayers while they contribute nothing but excuses. He is a self-made man. He worked his way up from nothing. He despises laziness, especially the kind of laziness that disguises itself as bad luck. My mother nodded vigorously, her earrings swinging. Oh, absolutely, Brad. Your father is a pillar of the community. We need more men like him. Tasha chimed in, her mouth full of steak. Exactly. Some people just expect a handout. They think family obligation means a blank check. I finished pouring and stepped back into the shadows. I gripped the neck of the wine bottle so hard my knuckles turned white. Brad was painting a picture of his father as a bigot to justify his own prejudice. But I knew William Sterling. I had clerked for him. I had argued cases before him. I knew he was a man of absolute integrity who hated one thing above all else: liars. Brad was using his father's name as a shield, not realizing it was about to become a sword. He talked about lazy people exploiting the system while he wore a watch bought with stolen charity funds. The hypocrisy was so thick I could practically taste it. I watched him take a long swallow of the wine. Enjoy it, Brad, I thought. Keep talking, keep digging that hole. Because in about 20 minutes, the man you are bragging about is going to walk through that door, and he is not going to be looking for lazy people. He is going to be looking for you. Brad finished his diatribe, and Tasha seized the moment to redirect the spotlight back to herself. She placed her hand on his arm and looked around the table with a practiced expression of humility that I recognized from her pageant days. That is exactly why I started the Hope for Youth initiative, she said, her voice dropping to a serious register. We are not just giving handouts, we are building character. Just last week we raised over $50,000 to build a new community center in the inner city. These children have nothing until we step in to save them. She paused for effect, wiping a non-existent tear from the corner of her eye. My mother clasped her hands together, beaming with pride. You are a saint, Tasha, truly doing God's work. Brad nodded approvingly. It is impressive, babe. Most girls your age are shopping, but you are changing lives. I stood in the shadows holding the water pitcher, listening to the applause. It was a master class in deception. I knew for a fact there was no community center. There were no children being saved. There was only a bank account in the Caymans and a fiancé with a gambling problem. I could have stayed silent. I should have stayed silent. But the image of that $50,000 transfer to the shell company was burning a hole in my memory. I stepped forward to refill Tasha's water glass. As the water poured, I spoke. My voice was calm, not loud, but it cut through the self-congratulatory atmosphere like a scalpel. Tasha, regarding the $50,000 raised tonight, is that being categorized as a restricted grant or general operating support? Because under IRS Section 501c3, international transfers to consulting firms require a specific Schedule F filing to maintain tax-exempt status. The room went dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. Tasha froze, her fork hovering halfway to her mouth. She looked at me, blinking rapidly as her brain tried to process the question. It was not the kind of question a waitress asks. It was the kind of question a federal auditor asks. Excuse me? She stammered, her composure cracking for the first time. What did you just say? I pulled the pitcher back so it would not drip on the tablecloth. I am just curious. I continued, keeping my face impassive. Since you mentioned the funds are for a community center, I assume you are avoiding overhead costs. But I noticed the transfer went to S&B Consulting, which is an offshore entity. Usually, domestic charities avoid offshore contractors to prevent audits. Unless, of course, the consulting firm provides a specialized service that cannot be found in the United States. Brad shifted in his chair, his face flushing a deep crimson. My mother looked from me to Tasha, her eyes narrowing. Jordan, stop babbling about things you do not understand. You are embarrassing yourself. But Tasha was not looking at our mother. She was staring at me with a mixture of fear and fury. She knew that I knew, but she also knew she could not admit it without exposing herself. She forced a laugh, a shrill sound that grated on everyone's ears. Oh my God, Jordan. You read one article on Google, and now you are a tax expert. Stick to pouring water, okay? The finances of a major nonprofit are way over your head. It is complicated. You would not understand the nuances of international philanthropy. I nodded slowly, retreating back into the role they wanted me to play. You are right, Tasha, I said softly. It is very complicated, especially when the IRS gets involved. I walked away, leaving the threat hanging in the air. Tasha picked up her wineglass and drained it in one gulp. Her hand was shaking. She knew the walls were closing in, but she had no idea the roof was about to collapse too. Tasha forced a laugh that sounded more like a bark of panic than genuine amusement. She waved her hand in the air, dismissing my question about the IRS, as if I were a buzzing fly that needed to be swatted away. You are so cute when you try to sound smart, Jordan, she said, her voice shrill. But honestly, it is a little pathetic. We all know why you are really asking these questions. You are not worried about tax codes. You are just jealous. You see what Brad and I have built, and it eats you alive, doesn't it? Doesn't? She turned to the table, seeking validation. My poor sister has been struggling for years. It must be hard for her to see her younger sibling achieving so much while she is still, well, doing whatever this is. She gestured at my apron with a look of utter disgust. Then she did something that made the air in the room grow heavy. She reached into her oversized orange Hermes Birkin bag. I watched her hand fumble inside the leather depths. I knew exactly what she was looking for. She pulled out a thick money clip filled with 20s and 50s. It was a flashy, vulgar display of cash meant to signal wealth, but to me it just signaled desperation. She peeled off a stack of bills, roughly $200, and tossed them onto the pristine white tablecloth. The money landed with a soft thud, right next to the crystal salt shaker. Here, Tasha said, pointing a manicured finger at the pile of cash. Take it. Consider it an early birthday present. Go buy yourself a shirt that does not smell like failure. Or maybe get your hair done. You look like you have been dragged through a hedge backwards. Just stop asking stupid questions about things that are way above your pay grade. My mother sighed, shaking her head with a look of long-suffering patience. Oh, Tasha, you are too generous. You really are. She turned to me, her eyes cold. Jordan, take the money and say thank you. Your sister is trying to help you. Do not let your pride get in the way of your survival. Brad chuckled, picking up his wineglass. Yeah, take it, Jordan. That is probably more than you make in a month serving drinks. Do not spend it all in one place now. I looked at the money sitting on the table. To them, it was a symbol of their dominance, a way to shut me up. But I saw something else. I saw the crisp edges of the bills. I saw the bank wrapper that Tasha had crumbled and left on the table next to them. It was a withdrawal from First National Bank, the same bank where the charity account was held. She had withdrawn cash from the non-profit account to use as a prop in her little play of superiority. This was not just an insult. It was evidence of embezzlement happening in real time. She was literally throwing stolen money at a federal judge and calling it charity. I felt a cold smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. They thought they were humiliating me, but they were just handing me another nail for their coffin. I did not move to take the money. I just stared at it, letting the silence stretch out, letting the awkwardness settle over the table like a suffocating blanket. Tasha shifted in her seat, her smile faltering slightly. What are you waiting for? She snapped. Take it and go. But I was not going anywhere. Not yet. I did not reach for the money. I let the bills sit there on the pristine white tablecloth like a dirty stain. The crisp edges of the $20 bills fluttered slightly under the air conditioning vent, but my hands remained firmly at my sides. Tasha was waiting for me to snatch it up like a desperate beggar. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes wide with anticipation, wanting the satisfaction of seeing me bow down to her financial superiority. She wanted me to validate her power. She wanted me to be the charity case she could save so she could feel better about her own fraudulent life. But I simply looked at her. I looked past the heavy layers of professional makeup and the expensive designer dress to the terrified, insecure girl underneath who knew she was playing with fire. "I do not need your money, Tasha," I said. My voice was low, but it carried through the room with a crystal clarity that cut through the ambient jazz music. "Keep it. You are going to need every cent of it for your legal defense fund." Tasha laughed, a nervous, brittle sound that cracked in the middle. "Legal defense fund. You are delusional, Jordan. Just take the cash and go buy some decent clothes. You are embarrassing yourself." "Am I?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "Then maybe you can explain something to me." "I am just curious why the Hope for Youth charity account initiated a wire transfer of $50,000 to the Lux Aesthetics and Plastic Surgery Center at 9 o'clock yesterday morning. The effect was instantaneous. It was as if I had sucked all the oxygen out of the room. The silence that descended was heavy and suffocating. My mother stopped chewing her steak, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. Brad put his wineglass down a little too hard, and the sound of the glass hitting the table echoed like a gunshot. The grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to tick louder, counting down the seconds of their destruction. Tasha went pale beneath her bronzer. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. I continued, my voice calm and relentless. "I know you told Mom you were saving up for that full-body contouring procedure before the wedding. But usually charities do not cover liposuction for their founders, unless there is a clause in the tax code for vanity expenses that I am unaware of." Tasha slammed her hand onto the table, causing the silverware to rattle. "That was a medical grant," she stammered, her voice rising an octave in panic. "It was for reconstructive surgery, for underprivileged children with burn marks. It was a direct payment to the facility for their treatment." "How dare you accuse me of using donor money for myself?" "Really," I replied, not blinking. "Because I checked the transaction code, Tasha. It was flagged as personal services, not medical grants. And I am pretty sure Lux Aesthetics specializes in Brazilian butt lifts, not burn reconstruction for orphans." My mother dropped her fork. It clattered onto her plate with a harsh metallic ring. Tasha turned red, then purple. She looked at Brad, seeking backup, but for the first time all night Brad did not look amused. He looked confused and a little bit suspicious. He looked at Tasha, then at me, then back at Tasha. The seed of doubt had been planted. The room was no longer a party. It was a crime scene, and I had just pointed out the smoking gun. The accusation about the plastic surgery hung in the air like toxic smoke. But before Tasha could stammer out another lie, my mother decided to detonate a bomb of her own. Patricia Banks did not just get angry, she went nuclear. She slammed her open palm against the mahogany table with a force that made the fine china jump and rattle against the wood. "Enough," she shrieked, her voice cracking with a desperation that bordered on hysteria. She stood up abruptly, her chair screeching against the floorboards. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my face, her eyes bulging with rage. "You shut your mouth, Jordan. You shut your poisonous mouth right now." She turned to Brad, her expression shifting instantly from fury to a pleading victimhood. "Brad, honey, do not listen to a word she says. You do not know her like we do. You do not know the history here." She took a deep breath, smoothing her silk caftan, as if trying to physically smooth over the situation. "Jordan has always been troubled. She is a pathological liar, Brad. It is a sickness, really. We have tried to get her help for years, but she just lives in these fantasies where she is the hero and everyone else is a villain." She looked at me with a look of pure venom before delivering the kill shot. "Tell him, Jordan. Tell him about the time you were 16. Tell him how you stole $500 from my purse to buy drugs and then blamed it on our housekeeper. We had to fire that poor woman because of you, because you could not admit you were a thief." I felt a cold numbness spread through my chest. The memory she was twisting was real, but the roles were reversed. Tasha had stolen the money to buy concert tickets, and I had taken the blame to protect her because I was the big sister. I had let them ground me for a month to save Tasha from my father's wrath. And now, 20 years later, my mother was weaponizing my own kindness against me. She was rewriting history to protect the golden child yet again. She knew Tasha was the thief. She had always known. But the truth was inconvenient, so she buried it under a mountain of lies. Brad let out a long exhale, looking visibly relieved to have a reason to dismiss me. "Oh, I see," he said, shaking his head with a smirk. "So that is what this is. You are just a kleptomaniac with a jealousy problem. Wow. That makes sense now. No wonder you are making up stories about charity fraud. You are just projecting your own criminal tendencies onto Tasha." My mother nodded vigorously, grabbing Tasha's hand. "Exactly, Brad. She is just jealous. She has always been jealous of Tasha. Please, just ignore her. She is mentally unstable." I stood there listening to them assassinate my character. They were stripping away my credibility brick by brick, hoping that if they called me crazy loud enough, the truth would disappear. But they forgot one thing. In a court of law, character witnesses only matter if they are credible. And I was about to prove that everyone at this table was a fraud. The timing was impeccable. It was almost cinematic in its perfection. The echo of my mother's accusation that I was a pathological thief had barely faded from the room when Tasha provided the physical evidence to support the lie. She suddenly gasped, dropping her fork with a clatter. She held her left hand up to the light, staring at her ring finger with wide, terrified eyes. The tan line where the massive 4-carat diamond had been sitting just minutes ago was visible, but the ring itself was gone. The scream she let out was primal, a high-pitched shriek that made the crystal chandelier vibrate. "My ring!" she screamed, scrambling out of her chair and frantically shaking her napkin. "Oh my God, my ring is gone!" "It was here. I had it on when I sat down. It is a $50,000 custom diamond." "Where is it?" Chaos erupted. Brad jumped up, knocking his chair backward. He grabbed Tasha's hand, inspecting it as if the ring might magically reappear if he squeezed her fingers hard enough. "Are you sure you didn't take it off in the bathroom?" he asked, his voice tight with panic. "That ring is not insured yet, Tasha." "No, I never take it off." Tasha wailed, tears streaming down her face faster than I thought physically possible. "I had it right here. It was on my finger when—" She stopped. The weeping ceased instantly, replaced by a look of cold realization. She slowly turned her head toward me, her eyes narrowed into slits. "It was on my finger when she poured the wine. She was standing right over me. She bumped into my chair, remember?" She leaned over to grab the water pitcher. The atmosphere in the room shifted from panic to hostility in a heartbeat. It was a physical weight pressing down on me. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls. "Oh, Jordan, no. Tell me you did not. Tell me you did not steal your sister's engagement ring just to spite her." "I told you, Brad. I told you she has a sickness. She cannot help herself." I stood near the sideboard holding the empty wine bottle. I felt the blood drain from my face, not from guilt, but from the sheer audacity of the accusation. "I did not take your ring, Tasha," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline pounding in my ears. "I have not touched you since you kicked me under the table. Check the floor, check your purse." Brad marched over to me. He was a big man, and he used his size to intimidate, looming over me with menace in his eyes. He did not look like a fiancé anymore. He looked like a thug. "Don't play dumb with us," he spat. "We all heard what your mother just said. You have a history of stealing. You are jealous. You are broke. And you are standing there in a servant's uniform with a $50,000 rock in your pocket. Give it back. Now. Or I swear to God I will make you regret it." I looked at them, the three of them united in their delusion. My father remained seated, pouring himself another drink, refusing to make eye contact. He was the coward in the corner. I looked Brad dead in the eye. "I do not have the ring. Search me if you want, but when you do not find it, you are going to apologize to me on your knees." Brad laughed a cruel, ugly sound. Search you. Oh, we will do more than that. We are calling the police. I hope you enjoy a strip search in a holding cell, because that is exactly where you are headed. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. He thought he was threatening me. He did not realize he was doing exactly what I wanted. Call them, I said. Call the police, Brad. I dare you. Brad stepped away from the table, and the air in the room seemed to condense around him. He did not walk, he stalked. He moved with the heavy, aggressive gait of a man who has never been punched in the face, and it showed in the way he invaded my personal space. He stopped less than 6 inches from me, effectively pinning me against the mahogany sideboard. I could smell the alcohol on his breath and see the tiny veins pulsing in his forehead. He pointed a finger at my chest, stabbing the air with every word. Let us use some logic here, Jordan, he said, his voice dangerously low. Everyone at this table is family. Everyone here has money. Everyone here belongs. You are the only variable. You are the only one who walked past Tasha's chair. You are the only one who went into the kitchen. And you are definitely the only one in this room who needs $50,000 to pay off your student loans or whatever pathetic debt you are drowning in. He held out his hand, palm up. Give me the bag. Give me the apron. And empty your pockets. If you hand it over now, I might not press charges. I might just ban you from this house forever. But if you make me call the cops, I will make sure you rot in a cell. I looked down at his hand, then up at his face. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my mind was ice cold. This was the moment where the power dynamic shifted, even if he did not realize it yet. He saw a scared waitress. I saw a defendant incatenating himself. I squared my shoulders and spoke with the authority of the bench. Brad, take a step back. You are currently trespassing on my personal space and threatening me with physical intimidation. If you touch me or my property without my consent, you are committing common law assault. If you attempt to restrain me or block my exit, you are committing false imprisonment. And if you reach into my pockets or my bag without a warrant or probable cause derived from law enforcement authority, you are violating my Fourth Amendment rights to privacy, as well as committing civil battery. Brad blinked. He looked as if I had suddenly started speaking Latin. The room went silent again, but this time it was a confused silence. My mother frowned, looking at me with a mixture of annoyance and bewilderment. Since when did you memorize the legal dictionary? She muttered. Stop talking nonsense, Jordan, and just do what he says. Brad's shock quickly morphed back into arrogance. He laughed a harsh barking sound that lacked any real humor. Oh, listen to her. She watches one episode of Law and Order and thinks she is a lawyer. You do not have rights here, Jordan. This is private property, my future father-in-law house, and I have the right to protect my property from a thief. He lunged forward, grabbing the strap of the canvas tote bag I had left on the counter. I gripped the other end. Do not do this. Brad, I warned him, my voice dropping to a whisper. If you open that bag, you are crossing a line you cannot uncross. There are things in there that are protected by federal privilege. Federal privilege, Brad scoffed, pulling the bag harder. What do you have in here? Stolen silverware, drugs, or maybe the ring. He yanked the bag with all his strength, tearing it from my grasp. The contents spilled out onto the floor with a loud crash. A few personal items scattered across the rug, a hairbrush, a wallet, and a bottle of water. But amidst the clutter there was no diamond ring. Instead, there was a black leather folio stamped with a gold seal. A seal that Brad did not recognize immediately, but one that would soon haunt his nightmares. He kicked the folio aside, ignoring it entirely, still looking for the glitter of diamonds. You hid it, he shouted, kicking my bag aside. You must have hidden it in the kitchen. I am calling the cops. You are done, Jordan. You are absolutely done. He pulled his phone out and dialed 911, his thumb hitting the screen with violent force. I stood there watching him seal his own fate. Go ahead, Brad, I said softly. Make the call. But remember, I told you to stop. Brad was shouting at the 911 operator, his voice booming through the foyer. But my mother was not satisfied with the speed of his interrogation. She was a woman of action, especially when that action involved humiliating me. She pushed Brad aside, her face twisted with a mix of panic and fury. "Give it to me," she snapped, grabbing the canvas tote from the floor where Brad had discarded it. "You are not looking hard enough. She has hidden it in the lining. I know her tricks." She looked at me with pure disgust. "You are not going to ruin this night for me, Jordan. I will strip you naked right here if I have to." She turned the bag upside down and shook it violently. The remaining contents that had not spilled during Brad's assault now crashed onto the hardwood floor. It was a chaotic noise, but amidst the sound of loose change and breath mints hitting the wood, there were three distinct heavy thuds that signaled something far more important than a diamond ring. The first was a heavy fountain pen made of black resin and gold. It rolled across the floor, stopping at Brad's feet. He looked down at it. It was a Mont Blanc Meisterstück, engraved with my initials, not something a waitress could afford, but he was too angry to process the incongruity. The second item was a thick manila folder bound with a red elastic band. It landed with a slap, sliding open just enough to reveal the top document. The bold header text was upside down to them, but I knew exactly what it said. United States District Court warrant of seizure. But it was the third object that should have made them stop breathing. It was a heavy circular object with a wooden handle and a brass base. My personal judicial seal. The red ink pad had fallen with it, and the seal had rolled, landing on its side. It stared up at them. The eagle, the shield, the words "official seal of the circuit judge" etched into the metal. Patricia stared at the pile of debris. She kicked the file aside with her expensive heel. She pushed the seal away with her toe. "Where is it?" she shrieked, dropping to her knees and clawing through the items. "Where is the ring, Jordan? I do not care about this junk." She picked up the file and threw it over her shoulder, not even glancing at the contents. She picked up the heavy gold pen and tossed it onto the sofa as if it were a piece of trash. She was so blinded by her narrative of me as a failure that she physically could not see the symbols of my success lying right in front of her. She was looking for a thief loot and missing the judge gavel. I watched her crawling on the floor in her silk caftan, destroying evidence of federal authority in her frantic search for a piece of jewelry. It was pathetic. It was tragic. And it was the final piece of evidence I needed to prove that Patricia Banks was beyond redemption. She held the seal in her hand for a second, feeling its weight before discarding it with a scoff. "Just garbage," she muttered. "Just heavy, useless garbage." She did not know she had just held her own sentence in the palm of her hand. My mother moved aside, panting from her exertion, and Tasha stepped forward, wiping her mascara-stained cheeks with the back of her hand. Her eyes, which had been filled with tears of self-pity a moment ago, now locked onto the object my mother had discarded. The brass base of the judicial seal caught the light from the chandelier, gleaming like a beacon in the mess of spilled mints and receipts. Tasha bent down and picked it up. She turned it over in her hands, feeling the substantial weight of the solid oak handle and the engraved brass die. For a second, I thought she might actually recognize it. I thought the reality of the situation might finally pierce through her bubble of delusion. But I was wrong. Tasha did not see authority. She saw a prop. She let out a high-pitched shriek of laughter that sounded manic in the tense room. She held the seal up for Brad and my mother to see, dangling it by the handle, as if it were a dead rat. "Look at this," she crowed, her voice dripping with derision. "Look what our big sister has in her bag." She brought it closer to her face, squinting at the reversed lettering on the die. "It says, 'Official Seal of the Circuit Judge.'" She paused, looking at me with wide, mocking eyes, before bursting into fresh peals of laughter. "Oh my God, Jordan. This is pathetic even for you. What is this? Is this a toy? Did you buy this on Amazon so you could play pretend in your little apartment?" Brad stepped closer, peering at the seal with a smirk. "No way," he said, shaking his head. "She actually had a fake seal made. That is hilarious. What are you doing, Jordan? Impersonating a government official to scam people. Is that your new grift? You go around pretending to be a judge so you can get free drinks or get out of parking tickets. Tasha tossed the seal into the air and caught it treating a federal instrument like a juggler's ball. It is not just a grift, Brad, she said, sneering. It is a mental illness. Mom was right. She is totally delusional. She probably sits in her room in her cheap pajamas, banging this on her desk, pretending she is important. Hey, Jordan, do you have a robe too? Do you wear a wig and sentence your teddy bears to life in prison? The cruelty was breathtaking. They were standing there holding the very object that gave me the power to authorize wiretaps and seize assets, and they were using it as a punchline. They were mocking the symbol of the United States judiciary because their minds were too small to comprehend that I could actually be who I said I was. Tasha walked over to me, invading my space again, and shoved the heavy seal into my chest. Here, she said, her voice dropping to a nasty whisper. Take your toy back. Maybe you can use it to stamp your rejection letters. But do not think this distracts us from the ring. We know you took it. And no amount of fake props is going to save you when the police get here. I took the seal. I felt the cold metal against my palm. It felt grounding. It felt real. They called it a toy, but I knew what it really was. It was the hammer. And they were the nails. I slipped the seal back into the pocket of my apron, my fingers brushing against the cold brass. Keep laughing, Tasha, I thought, because in a few minutes you are going to realize that the only person playing pretend in this room is you. And unlike my seal, your handcuffs will be very real. Tasha was not satisfied with just mocking the seal, she wanted to dispose of it. She reached out her manicured claws, snatching the heavy brass object back from my hand before I could secure it in my pocket. Actually, she sneered, walking toward the stainless steel trash can in the corner of the dining room. This belongs where you belong, Jordan, in the garbage. She raised her arm, ready to toss the symbol of federal authority into a bin filled with shrimp tails and used napkins. She wanted to hear the thud. She wanted to see me dive after it. But her arm froze in midair. The doorbell rang. It was not the polite chime of a guest arriving fashionably late. It was a heavy, authoritative sound that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards, demanding immediate attention. The sound cut through the tension in the room like a knife. Brad's face lit up with a predatory glee. He checked his gold Rolex and grinned. "That is him," he announced, his voice booming with relief and triumph. "That is my father." He turned to me, pointing a finger right in my face, his eyes wide with excitement. "You are so lucky the police are not here yet, Jordan, because now you have to deal with something much worse. You have to deal with the Honorable William Sterling. He is going to destroy you." He walked towards the foyer, fixing his tie, checking his reflection in the hallway mirror. He was preening like a peacock about to display its feathers. "My dad hates liars," Brad shouted back at me, making sure the whole room heard every syllable. "He hates scammers. And he especially hates low-life criminals who steal from family. He is going to take one look at you, hear what you did, and he is going to make sure you go away for a long time. He knows the district attorney personally. He knows the chief of police. You are finished." My mother clapped her hands together, rushing to smooth Tasha's hair. "Oh, thank goodness," she breathed. "A real judge. Someone with class. He will know exactly what to do with her." Tasha lowered her arm, deciding to hold onto the seal as evidence of my insanity rather than throwing it away. She smirked at me, clutching the brass stamp. "I hope you like prison food, Jordan, because Judge Sterling is not going to have any mercy on a thief." I stood there, surrounded by their hate, surrounded by their ignorance. I watched Brad rush to the door like a puppy waiting for its master. I watched my mother put on her best hostess smile, hiding the ugliness of her soul behind a mask of politeness. They thought judgment was coming for me. They had no idea that judgment was already in the room. I felt the weight of the moment settling on my shoulders. It was not fear, it was gravity. The gravity of the truth that was about to crush them. I reached up and slowly unrolled the sleeves of my oversized white shirt. I adjusted the cuffs, making sure they were neat. I smoothed the front of my stained apron. I stood up straighter, assuming the posture I used when entering my courtroom. I looked at Brad's retreating back and then at Tasha, who was still holding my seal like a weapon. "You are right, Brad," I whispered, my voice lost in the commotion of their excitement, but loud enough for the silence in my own head. "Your father is a man of justice, so let him handle it." Brad threw the double doors open wide. "Dad," he exclaimed, his voice full of false bravado. "Come in. You are not going to believe what is happening. We caught a thief red-handed." The heavy oak door swung inward, revealing the man of the hour. Judge William Sterling did not just walk into a room, he occupied it. He was a towering figure with silver hair combed back severely, and a face etched with the kind of hard lines that come from decades of passing judgment on criminals. He wore a charcoal gray trench coat over a suit that looked sharper than a razor blade. He carried no gifts, no wine, only an aura of absolute terrifying authority. The temperature in the foyer seemed to drop 10 degrees as he stepped across the threshold, bringing the chill of the evening air with him. He looked like a man who had not smiled since the Reagan administration. Brad did not give his father a chance to breathe, let alone take off his coat. He pounced on him with the frantic energy of a child who had broken a vase and needed to blame the cat before his parents noticed. "Dad!" Brad exclaimed, grabbing his father's arm and practically dragging him further inside. "Thank God you are here. You have to help us. We have a crisis. A major crisis." William Sterling looked at his son, his steel-gray eyes narrowing slightly under bushy brows. He peeled off his leather gloves slowly, finger by finger, without breaking eye contact. "Calm down, Bradley," he said, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble that commanded instant obedience. "Compose yourself. What is going on?" Brad took a breath, but his eyes were wild. "It is," Tasha's sister Brad explained, speaking a mile a minute. "She is here. And she is completely unhinged, Dad. I mean seriously mentally unstable. We invited her out of pity because she is unemployed and struggling, but she repaid us by robbing us blind. She stole Tasha's engagement ring, the $50,000 diamond I just bought. She swiped it right off the table while pretending to serve drinks." William stopped removing his coat. He stood perfectly still. "Theft." He repeated the word, heavy with disdain. "In this house." "Yes. Theft," Brad insisted, eager to fuel his father's anger. "But that is not even the worst part. She is not just a thief, Dad, she is a con artist. When we tried to get the ring back, we found a bag full of fake documents. She has this toy stamp that looks like a judicial seal. She has been running around pretending to be a federal official. Can you believe that? She is impersonating a judge to scam people. She is probably using it to commit fraud. I was about to call the police, but I knew you would want to handle this personally. You hate this kind of scum more than anyone." William handed his coat to Brad, assuming his son would hang it up, but Brad was too busy gesturing toward the dining room. "She is in there right now," Brad continued, pointing a shaking finger toward the double doors. "Tasha and Patricia are watching her so she does not run." "But she is dangerous, Dad. She is lying about everything. She even tried to accuse Tasha of embezzlement just to distract us from her crime. You need to go in there and put the fear of God into her. Tell her who she is dealing with. Tell her she cannot mess with a federal judge family." William adjusted his cufflinks. His face remained unreadable, a mask of stone. "Impersonating a judge," he said quietly. "That is a serious felony, Bradley. If what you say is true, she will face the full weight of the law." "Exactly." Brad grinned, looking triumphant. "That is exactly what I told her. I told her you would destroy her. Come on, let me show you the evidence. Let me show you the fake seal she made. You are going to laugh when you see how pathetic it is." Brad turned and marched toward the dining room, confident that he was leading the executioner to the condemned. He pushed the doors open with a flourish, stepping aside to let his father pass. He thought he was unleashing a monster on me. He did not realize he was leading a lion into a den where the lion tamer was waiting. William Sterling stepped past his son and walked into the dining room, his eyes scanning the space, ready to confront the low-life criminal his son had described. Judge William Sterling entered the dining room like a thundercloud rolling over a valley. The air pressure changed immediately. The jovial atmosphere of the party evaporated, replaced by a tense, respectful silence. But Brad did not notice the shift. He was too busy playing sheriff. He marched across the Persian rug, avoiding the spot where the soup had spilled, and made a beeline for me. He did not ask me to come forward. He grabbed my upper arm. His fingers dug into my bicep hard enough to bruise. He yanked me out of the shadows and into the harsh light of the chandelier right in front of his father. I stumbled slightly but regained my footing quickly, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me fall again. "Look at her, Dad," Brad spat, pushing me forward as if I were a piece of cattle at an auction. "Look at this pathetic mess. She stands there acting like a victim, but she is a predator. She came into our home, ate our food, and then tried to rob us blind." Brad turned to Tasha, snapping his fingers. "Give it to me," he barked. Tasha eagerly handed over the heavy brass seal, her eyes gleaming with malice. Brad shoved the object toward his father's face, almost hitting him in the nose with the wooden handle. "Look at this forgery, Dad. Just look at the absolute audacity of it. She actually went to a trophy shop and had them make a fake federal seal. She carries it around in her purse to intimidate people. She probably flashes it at bartenders to get free drinks or scams elderly people into thinking she is an official. It is sick. It is pathological." William stood motionless. He looked at the brass object in his son's hand, but he did not speak. Brad took his silence for contemplation and pressed harder. "You know the law, Dad, better than anyone. Possession of a forged federal instrument. Impersonating a judicial officer. That is a felony. That is 10 years minimum, right? I want you to make a call. Call the Marshal Service. Call the FBI. I want her in handcuffs tonight. I want her to rot in a cell where she belongs so she can never steal from decent, hard-working people like us again. Do not show her any mercy just because she is Tasha's sister. She lost the right to be family when she became a criminal." I stood there, my arm throbbing from Brad's grip. I did not pull away. I did not scream. I looked past Brad. I looked past his spit flying in the air. I locked eyes with William Sterling. I saw the moment the recognition hit him. It was subtle at first, a widening of the pupils, a slight parting of the lips. I saw his eyes travel from the brass seal in Brad's hand up to my face. I saw the color drain from his skin, turning his complexion a pale shade of gray. He recognized the seal because he had one exactly like it on his own desk. He recognized the engraving because it was standard issue for the circuit court. And most importantly, he recognized me. He recognized the woman he had sworn in 6 months ago. He recognized the colleague he had debated case law with at the judicial conference. Brad was still shouting, unaware that he was digging his own grave. "She is a menace, Dad. She is a cancer. Cut her out." But William was not looking at the cancer. He was looking at his peer. He reached out a trembling hand and took the seal from Brad. He held it with reverence, turning it over to check the serial number stamped on the side. The room went silent, waiting for the hammer of justice to fall. Brad grinned, expecting the explosion. He had no idea the explosion was about to be directed at him. Brad kept shouting about prison cells and handcuffs, his voice bouncing off the walls like a rubber ball. But for William Sterling, the sound seemed to fade into a dull buzz. He held the heavy brass object in his hands. His fingers traced the cold metal of the die. He did not need to squint to read the reverse lettering. He knew the weight. He knew the balance. He had held a seal just like this every day for the past 20 years. This was not a toy. This was not a prop purchased on Amazon. This was a government-issued instrument of the United States Federal Circuit Court. It was authentic down to the microscopic serial number etched into the base. Slowly, painfully, William raised his eyes from the seal. He did not look at his son, who was still foaming at the mouth with accusations. He did not look at Tasha or Patricia. He looked straight at the woman standing in the center of the room, the woman in the grease-stained apron, the woman with the messy hair and the cheap shoes. He looked at her face, and then the memory hit him like a freight train. He had seen that face before, not in a mugshot, not on a wanted poster. He had seen it 6 months ago in the grand ceremonial hall of the Supreme Court building. He had sat in the third row while the Chief Justice administered the oath of office. He had watched this woman place her hand on the Bible and swear to uphold the Constitution. She was not just a judge. She was Judge Jordan Banks of the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. She sat on the bench that reviewed his decisions. She was the one who could overturn his rulings with a stroke of that very pen Brad had kicked across the floor. She was effectively his boss. The color drained from William's face so fast it looked like the blood had been siphoned out of him. His knees actually buckled slightly. The terrifying hammer of justice looked like he had just seen a ghost. His mouth opened, but no words came out. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure panic. He looked at the soup stains on her apron. He looked at the bruise forming on her arm where his son had grabbed her. He looked at the contempt on his family's faces. He realized with a sickening lurch in his stomach that his idiot son had just assaulted a federal judge. His future daughter-in-law had just attempted to humiliate a woman who held the power to destroy their entire legal standing. And his wife was standing there nodding along like an accomplice to a felony. The room started to spin. Brad was still talking, saying something about how Jordan was a low-life scammer, but William could only hear the sound of his own career imploding. He had spent 40 years building a reputation as a stern, uncompromising jurist, and in the span of 5 minutes, his family had managed to set fire to it all. He looked at Jordan again. She was not cowering. She was not crying. She was looking back at him with an expression of cold, expecting judgment. She raised one eyebrow slightly, a micro-expression he had seen her use in court right before delivering a scathing verdict. It was a silent challenge. "Do you know who I am, William?" it seemed to ask. "Do you know what your son has done?" The silence stretched out terrifying and absolute. William felt like he was the one on trial and the verdict was already guilty. Brad was still rambling about federal prison terms, oblivious to the fact that the atmosphere in the room had shifted from a party to a funeral. He was practically vibrating with the anticipation of seeing me handcuffed. "Go on, Dad," he urged, gesturing wildly at me. "Tell her. Tell this fraud what the penalty is for impersonating a federal official. Tell her she is going to spend the next decade staring at a concrete wall." But William Sterling was not listening to his son. The noise of Brad's voice had become a distant irritation, like a buzzing fly that needed to be swatted. William's entire universe had narrowed down to the woman standing in front of him, wearing a dirty apron and holding the silence like a weapon. Suddenly, William moved. He did not step forward to arrest me. He turned on his heel and shoved Brad aside, with a force that sent his son stumbling back into the sideboard. "Move!" William barked, his voice cracking like a whip. "Get out of my way, you imbecile!" Brad froze, his mouth hanging open in shock. He had never seen his father lose composure like this. He watched confused as William straightened his jacket, smoothed his tie, and walked toward me. The room held its breath. Tasha smirked, thinking the physical intimidation was about to begin. My mother nodded, expecting a lecture that would flay me alive. They watched as the great William Sterling closed the distance between us. But when he reached me, he did not raise his voice. He did not point a finger. He stopped exactly 3 feet away, keeping the respectful distance required by protocol. He looked me in the eye, and I saw the terror swimming behind his steel-gray iris. Then he did the unthinkable. The man who had never bowed to anyone in his life, the man who demanded absolute submission in his own courtroom, bent at the waist. It was not a nod. It was a formal, deferential bow of 45 degrees. He held the position for a long, agonizing second before straightening up. His hands, which were usually steady, were trembling slightly at his sides. "Good evening, Your Honor." William said, his voice dropping to a tone of humble reverence that his family had never heard before. "I must apologize profusely. I had absolutely no idea you were present this evening. If I had known, I would have ensured a reception befitting your station." The words hung in the air for a split second before the laws of physics seemed to crash back into the room. Tasha, who had been raising her wineglass to her lips to celebrate my demise, went numb. Her fingers lost their grip. The crystal glass slipped from her hand and hit the hardwood floor. The sound was deafening. It shattered into 1,000 glittering shards, sending red wine splashing across her white shoes like blood. But no one moved to clean it up. No one breathed. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy and suffocating. Brad looked from his father to me, his brain unable to process the data. Tasha stared at the broken glass, her face a mask of frozen horror. My mother looked as if she had just been slapped. The world had turned upside down. The servant was the master and the judge was on his knees. The sound of the shattering wineglass seemed to echo endlessly in the sudden vacuum of silence. Tasha stared at the red stain spreading across the hardwood floor, then looked up at William with eyes that were wide and vacant. Her brain simply refused to compute the data. Her father, the most powerful man she knew, had just bowed to the sister she had been tormenting all night. It had to be a joke. It had to be a mistake caused by the dim lighting, or perhaps he had had too much to drink before arriving. She let out a nervous, high-pitched giggle that sounded more like a hiccup of panic. "Dad," she stammered, stepping over the broken glass and reaching for his arm. "What are you doing? Why are you calling her that? You must be confused. It is just Jordan. It is just the failure sister. She is a waitress. She is nobody." William spun around on his heel with a speed that belied his age. His face was no longer gray, it was flushed with a terrifying shade of crimson. "Silence," he roared. The word exploded from his chest with such force that Tasha actually flinched, stepping back as if she had been slapped. "Do not speak another word, Tasha. Do not insult her again. Do not even breathe in her direction, unless you want to be held in contempt of court in your own living room." He pointed a trembling hand at me, but this time the gesture was not one of accusation, but of frantic introduction. "You ignorant child," he hissed, his voice dripping with venomous fear. "You have absolutely no idea what you have done. You are looking at a waitress, but you should be looking at the law. This is not just Jordan. This is the Honorable Jordan Banks. She was confirmed last month by the Senate to the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit." Brad let out a choking sound behind him. He stumbled back against the sideboard, his face draining of color. The D.C. Circuit. Even with his limited knowledge, he knew what that meant. It was the second most powerful court in the country, the court that decided the fate of presidents and corporations, the stepping stone to the Supreme Court. William continued, his voice shaking with a mixture of rage and terror. "She is one of the highest-ranking judges in the federal judiciary. She is my superior, Bradley. She sits on the panel that reviews my cases. She has the power to overturn my rulings, to sanction my courtroom, and to end my career with a single written opinion. In fact, she signed the administrative order just last week that certified my district's budget and tenure. My entire professional life is in her hands. And you just assaulted her. You just accused a federal circuit judge of stealing a ring and threatened to strip search her like a common criminal." William turned back to me, his posture slumping as the reality of the disaster settled over him. He looked like a man watching a guillotine blade drop. Tasha looked at me, then at the brass seal she had called a toy, then back at me. The realization crashed into her with the force of a physical blow. The mysterious job, the secrecy, the calm confidence. It was not failure. It was power. Immense, terrifying power. And she had just spent 3 hours spitting on it. The room was paralyzed by the weight of William's revelation. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the ragged breathing of my mother, who looked like she was about to faint. But I did not give them a moment to recover. I was done playing the part of the downtrodden sibling. I was done making myself small so they could feel big. I reached behind my back and untied the knot of the greasy black apron. The cheap fabric slid off my waist. I gathered it into a ball in my hands, feeling the texture of the spilled soup and the dust from the floor. I looked at Brad, who was still pressing himself against the sideboard, trying to disappear. I did not toss the apron. I pitched it. I threw it with the precision of a gavel strike. The fabric hit Brad square in the chest with a wet thud, leaving a stain on his immaculate navy suit before sliding down to his feet. "You can keep the uniform, Brad," I said, my voice dropping an octave, losing the tremulous whisper I had used all evening. "It seems you are going to be doing a lot of cleaning up in the near future." I began to unbutton the cuffs of my oversized white shirt. The movements were slow and deliberate. I folded the fabric back once, then twice, revealing my forearms. As I rolled the left sleeve up the chandelier, light caught the object I had kept hidden all night. It was not a string bracelet or a cheap digital watch. It was a Rolex Daytona. But it was not gold like Brad's gaudy timepiece. It was solid platinum with an ice blue dial. It was a watch that whispered wealth rather than screaming it. A watch that cost more than the entire engagement party combined. Tasha saw it. Her eyes widened. She knew jewelry. She knew that watch was the holy grail of collectors. She realized in that split second that the sister she had just offered $200 in charity could have bought and sold her 10 times over. I adjusted the watch on my wrist and looked up. The transformation was physical. I straightened my spine, adding 2 inches to my height. I tilted my chin up, looking down my nose at them, not with arrogance, but with the cool, detached objectivity of the bench. The nervous, fidgety Jordan they knew was gone. In her place stood Judge Banks. The air in the room seemed to bend around me. I walked to the head of the table where Tasha had been sitting. I placed my hands on the back of her chair, claiming the space. I looked at my mother, who was trembling. I looked at Tasha, who was crying. And I looked at Brad, who was sweating. "You asked for a judge," I said, my voice filling the room with terrifying clarity. "Well, you have one. And since you were so eager to discuss the law, let us discuss it. But we are not going to discuss petty theft. We are going to discuss wire fraud. We are going to discuss embezzlement. And we are going to discuss the assault of a federal officer." I looked at William. He nodded slowly, acknowledging my authority. The court is now in session. I walked over to the sofa where my mother had carelessly tossed the manila folder earlier. I picked it up, dusting off the invisible specks of dirt with a deliberate calmness that made Brad flinch. The room was so quiet I could hear the distinct snap of the red elastic band as I pulled it free. I opened the file. The pages inside were not fake. They were thick bond paper stamped with the official watermark of the Department of Justice and the seal of the grand jury. I did not look at my mother. I did not look at Tasha. Those relationships were irrelevant now. I looked only at the defendant. "Bradley James Sterling," I said. My voice was stripped of all emotion. It was the voice I used when sentencing violent offenders. "Step forward." Brad did not move. He looked at his father for help, but William was staring at the floor, refusing to meet his eyes. Brad swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" "I am not in the habit of joking about federal indictments," I replied, flipping to the first page. "You are currently the subject of a sealed grand jury investigation. The evidence contained in this file outlines a pattern of racketeering activity that spans 3 states and 2 international jurisdictions." I looked up, pinning him with my gaze. "You are formally accused of 12 counts of securities fraud, 6 counts of wire fraud, and 4 counts of money laundering in the first degree." "That is a lie," Brad shouted, stepping forward, his face turning a blotchy red. "You typed that up on your laptop. You cannot prove any of that." I did not flinch. I simply turned the page. The investigation tracked a series of structured deposits into the Hope for Youth charity account. These funds were not donations. They were illicit proceeds from an illegal Ponzi scheme you operated under the guise of a tech startup in New Jersey. You then transferred these funds to S&B Consulting in the Cayman Islands, a shell company, where you are the sole signatory. We have the bank records, Brad. We have the IP addresses. We have the emails where you instructed Tasha to withdraw cash to avoid reporting thresholds. Tasha let out a whimper, clutching the table for support. I did not know, she sobbed. He told me it was for tax purposes. He told me it was legal. Ignorance of the law is not a defense, Tasha, I said, cutting her off without looking at her. Especially when you are the face of the organization used to wash dirty money. I turned back to Brad. You used this family. You used my sister's vanity and my father's reputation to build a shield for your crimes. You thought because my father was a state judge, you were untouchable. You forgot to check who sat on the appellate bench above him. I closed the file with a sharp snap that echoed like a gunshot. The time for talking is over, Mr. Sterling. The time for accounting has begun. I watched the color drain from Brad's face as the reality of his situation set in, but I was not finished. There was one final nail to drive into the coffin of his arrogance. I reached back into the folder and pulled out a single sheet of blue legal paper. It was a loan guarantee for $2 million, secured against the assets of the Sterling family estate. I walked over to William Sterling, who was still standing in a state of shock, and held the document out to him. You should recognize this, Your Honor. I said, my voice quiet but firm. It is the document that authorized the initial capital for the shell company. Look at the signature on the bottom line. William took the paper, his hands trembling so violently that the page rattled in the silent room. He squinted at the ink. He saw his own name scrawled across the guarantor line in a script that looked nearly identical to his own. But he knew. A man knows the stroke of his own pen, and he knew he had never signed this document. He looked up at his son, and the expression on his face shifted from fear to a profound, heartbreaking disgust. You forged my signature, William whispered, his voice sounding hollow and dead. You forged a sitting federal judge's name on a fraudulent loan application. Brad stepped back, raising his hands in a pathetic gesture of defense. Dad, please listen, he stammered, sweat pouring down his forehead. It was just a bridge loan. I was going to pay it back before you ever noticed. I just needed the liquidity to get the project moving. It was for the family legacy, Dad. I did it for us. William let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. For us, he repeated bitterly. He crumbled the document in his fist and threw it at Brad's chest. You have destroyed us. Do you have any idea what this means? When this comes out, I will be disbarred. My rulings will be questioned. My integrity will be shredded in the press. 40 years of unblemished service. 40 years of building a reputation as a man of honor. And you burned it all down to fund a Ponzi scheme. He looked at Brad, not as a father looks at a son, but as a man looks at a parasite. You did not just steal money, Bradley. You stole my life. You stole my legacy. He turned his back on his son, unable to even look at him. You are no longer my child, he said to the wall. You are a liability. And I hope Judge Banks shows you more mercy than I would, because as far as I am concerned, you are already dead to me. The silence that followed William's renunciation of his son was heavy enough to crush bones, but Tasha Banks had a survival instinct that was sharper than any knife. She looked at Brad, who was currently staring at the floor, a broken man, and then she looked at me standing there with the federal seal and the platinum watch. She did the math in a split second. Brad was a sinking ship, and Tasha was not about to drown with him. She let out a gasp of theatrical horror and physically shoved Brad away from her. The force of the push caught him off guard, and he stumbled back, knocking over a chair. It was you, Tasha screamed, her voice shrill and piercing. You liar. You told me it was legal. You told me your father approved everything. She turned to me, her eyes wide and wet with fresh tears that seemed to appear on command. Jordan, please listen to me, please. I had no idea. I am a victim here too. He used me. He told me that if I did not sign those withdrawal slips, the charity would go bankrupt and the children would suffer. I only did it for the children, Jordan. You have to believe me. She rushed toward me, her hands outstretched, pleading for salvation from the sister she had called a loser 5 minutes ago. She looked desperate. She looked pathetic. But most of all, she looked guilty. I took a step back, refusing to let her touch me. "Do not come any closer, Tasha," I said coldly. But she did not stop. She dropped to her knees right there on the wine-stained floor, ruining her white dress without a second thought. "Jordan, please, we are sisters. Blood is thicker than water, right? You cannot let them take me to prison for his crimes. He forced me. He threatened to leave me if I did not help him transfer the money. I was scared. I did not know what else to do." She pointed a shaking finger at Brad. "Look at him. He is a monster. He manipulated all of us. You saw how he treated you tonight. Imagine what he is like behind closed doors." Brad looked up, his eyes wide with betrayal. "What are you talking about, Tasha?" he shouted, his voice cracking. "You came up with the idea for the fake invoices. You were the one who wanted the money for the plastic surgery and the wedding dress. You told me your sister was too stupid to notice the discrepancies." "You shut up!" Tasha shrieked, drowning him out. "Do not listen to him, Jordan. He is trying to drag me down with him. I am innocent. I am your little sister. You have always protected me. Please just make this go away. Just tell the FBI it was a mistake. You have the power to do that. You are a judge. You can fix this for me." I looked down at her. She was groveling, begging me to abuse my power, to save her from the consequences of her own greed. She was willing to send her fiancé to prison alone, just to save her own skin. It was the ultimate act of cowardice. I felt nothing for her. No pity, no anger, just a cold clinical detachment. "You are right, Tasha," I said, my voice flat. "I do have the power. But I swore an oath to use it for justice, not to clean up your mess. And right now, justice looks a lot like an accomplice charge." I looked down at my sister, who was still clutching the hem of my trousers, weeping crocodile tears. She was putting on the performance of a lifetime, casting herself as the naive victim caught in a web of deceit. It was almost convincing, except for one small detail. I reached into my pocket and retrieved my smartphone. I did not unlock it with a passcode. This time I simply tapped the screen to wake it up. The interface displayed a waveform audio file that had been recorded just 48 hours ago, intercepted via the federal wiretap I had authorized on her personal device. "Save your tears, Tasha," I said, my voice cutting through her sobs like a razor. "Perjury is an ugly look on you. You claim you were coerced. You claim you did not know." I pressed play. Tasha's voice filled the room, loud and unmistakable, but it was not the shrill voice of a victim. It was the cold, calculating tone of a boss. "Brad, stop whining about the risk." The recording played, the sound quality crisp and damning. "Just move the 50,000. I do not care if it is illegal. I need that money for the venue deposit. If you mess this up, I will find someone else who can launder it properly. I am the one running this charity, remember? You just sign the checks." The recording ended with a sharp click. The silence that followed was heavier than lead. Tasha slowly released my leg. She did not look up. She froze, staring at the floor as the echo of her own arrogance faded from the room. The mask of the innocent little sister had been ripped away, revealing the predator underneath. I tapped the phone against my palm, looking at her with a mixture of pity and disgust. "That does not sound like a victim to me, Tasha," I said softly. "That sounds like a CEO giving orders. That sounds like intent." I leaned down slightly so she could hear every syllable. "Your testimony contradicts the electronic evidence. Brad may be the forger and the fool, but you, Tasha, you are the mastermind. You were not forced to steal. You orchestrated it. And unlike Brad, who might get a plea deal for cooperation, the federal government does not offer deals to the ringleader. You built this trap yourself, and now you are going to die in it." The echo of Tasha's recorded voice had barely faded when the front door shattered. There was no polite knock this time. The heavy oak panels exploded inward under the force of a battering ram, sending splinters flying across the marble foyer like shrapnel. A wall of noise hit us instantly. "FBI federal agents, get down on the ground." The command was a collective roar from a dozen throats. Men and women in tactical vests with yellow bold lettering poured into the house, moving with the fluid precision of a pack of wolves. The room dissolved into chaos. Red laser sights cut through the haze of the chandelier, frantically searching for targets. My mother screamed a high, piercing sound that was immediately drowned out by the stomping of heavy combat boots on the hardwood. Brad tried to run. It was a pathetic, instinctual attempt to flee toward the kitchen, but he did not make it 3 steps. 2 agents tackled him from the side. His body hit the floor with a bone-jarring thud that shook the furniture. Tasha did not run. She stood frozen in terror until a female agent spun her around and forced her to her knees. "Put your hands behind your back," the agent shouted. Tasha wailed, struggling uselessly against the zip ties tightening around her wrists. Then came the moment of perfect poetic justice. The agents pushed them both flat against the floor to secure them. They were pinned face down on the exact section of the Persian rug where Tasha had tripped me just an hour ago. Tasha's cheek was pressed against the lingering stain of the lobster bisque she had laughed at. Brad's nose was inches from the spot where I had gathered the shards of the broken tureen. They were writhing in the very spot where they had tried to break my spirit. I stood motionless in the center of the storm, my platinum watch catching the light as the red and blue strobes from the cruisers outside began to flash through the windows. I did not flinch. I did not move. I watched the agents recite the Miranda rights, the words flowing like a familiar hymn. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you." William Sterling stepped back, his hands raised in surrender, acknowledging the jurisdiction of the raid. He looked at me, then at his son being dragged up from the floor. He knew the procedure. He knew the endgame. The party was officially over. The chaos of the arrest was a blur of motion, but one figure cut through the noise with the desperate focus of a heat-seeking missile. My mother, Patricia Banks, scrambled across the room, ignoring her ruined dinner party, ignoring the shattered glass, and threw herself at me. She grabbed my hands, her grip surprisingly strong, her manicured nails digging into my skin. Her face was a ruin of running mascara, and panic, the mask of the composed socialite, completely dissolved. She did not look at Tasha, who was being hauled out the front door in handcuffs. She looked at me. For the first time in my life, she looked at me not with contempt, but with a terrifying, hungry desperation. "Jordan, please," she wailed, her voice cracking into a sob. "You have to stop them. You are the judge. You have the authority. Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them to let her go. She is your sister, Jordan. She is your baby sister." I tried to pull my hands away, but she clung tighter, dropping to her knees so her weight dragged on my arms. The physical weight of her was suffocating, but the emotional weight was worse. "Do not do this to your family," she pleaded, the tears streaming down her face, mixing with her foundation. "Think about what you are doing. I gave birth to you. I raised you. I put a roof over your head. Does that mean nothing to you? You cannot destroy us like this. You cannot let them take Tasha away to a cage. She will not survive in there, Jordan. She is soft. She needs us." I looked down at the woman weeping at my feet. This was the same woman who had stood by and laughed while Tasha humiliated me. This was the woman who had accused me of stealing money to buy drugs. This was the woman who had called me a failure and an embarrassment just 20 minutes ago. Now suddenly she wanted to play the mother card. She wanted to invoke the sacred bond of family that she had spent decades violating. "Family comes first, Jordan," she hissed, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "We protect our own. No matter what happens inside this house, we present a united front to the world. You know that. That is the rule. Please, baby. Just make a phone call. Use your power. Save her. Save us. If this gets out, we are ruined. The scandal will kill your father. Do it for him. Do it for the mother who carried you for 9 months." The hypocrisy was so thick I could taste it. She was not asking for mercy because she loved Tasha. She was asking for a cover-up because she loved her reputation. She did not care about justice or truth. She only cared about how this would look at the country club. She was using the biology of motherhood as a weapon to guilt me into becoming an accessory to a crime. She squeezed my hands, shaking them, trying to force a reaction, trying to find the weak little girl she used to bully. But that girl was gone. I looked at her with a detachment that felt colder than the platinum watch on my wrist. I saw her not as my mother, but as a character witness for the defense who had just lost all credibility. She was begging for a miracle, but she was praying to the wrong God. I was not there to grant wishes. I was there to deliver the consequences she had spent a lifetime avoiding. I slowly peeled her fingers off my wrists one by one, breaking the physical connection she was trying so desperately to use against me. I stood up and took a step back, putting a chasm of empty air between us. I looked at her tear-stained face and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just the clinical detachment of a surgeon cutting out necrotic tissue. "You are absolutely right, Patricia," I said, my voice steady and calm. "Family is the most important thing in the world. It is the foundation of our society. But there is a flaw in your logic. You dissolved our family ties the moment I walked through that door tonight. You looked at me and you saw a servant. You told the guests I was the help. You banished me to the kitchen to eat scraps while you feasted. You made a choice at 6 o'clock this evening to remove me from this family. You cannot revoke that choice now, just because it is no longer convenient for you." Patricia stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to process the rejection. But I did not give her time to argue. I turned my head slightly and made a sharp gesture to the lead FBI agent standing by the broken china cabinet. He stepped forward immediately, pulling a folded document from his tactical vest. He did not hand it to me. He walked directly to my mother and thrust the paper into her trembling hands. "What is this?" she whispered, looking down at the heavy legal stock. "It is a subpoena," I answered. "And a notice of investigation. You see, Mother, the federal government does not believe that Tasha acted alone. We know about the joint tax returns you signed. We know that you knowingly allowed your home to be used as the base of operations for a criminal enterprise. We know that you accepted gifts purchased with stolen funds, including that diamond necklace you are wearing right now. That makes you an accessory after the fact. It makes you a co-conspirator." She gasped, clutching the necklace as if it were burning her skin. "Jordan, no," she breathed. "I am your mother. Not anymore," I replied, turning my back on her to watch Tasha being loaded into the cruiser. "Tonight you are just defendant number 3. Get a lawyer, Patricia. You are going to need a very expensive one." The dining room was finally quiet. The screaming had stopped. The shouting of orders had faded as the agents escorted the defendants out to the transport vehicles. The only sound remaining was the rhythmic flashing of the red and blue lights from the driveway, casting long dancing shadows across the ruined dinner table. Judge William Sterling stood amidst the wreckage of the evening. He looked like a man who had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. His shoulders were slumped, his pristine suit looked too big for him, and his face was the color of ash. He stared at the spot on the floor where his son had been handcuffed, unable to look away from the physical manifestation of his failure. I adjusted my cuffs and prepared to leave, but as I turned, William spoke. His voice was barely a whisper, a ghost of the booming baritone that usually commanded courtrooms. "Your Honor," he said. I stopped and turned back to him. He did not look at me immediately. He took a shuddering breath and slowly lifted his eyes to meet mine. There was no arrogance left in him, only a profound, humiliating shame. "I offer you my deepest apologies, Judge Banks," he said, his voice trembling. "Not just for the behavior of my family tonight, but for my own blindness. I raised a criminal. I harbored a fraud in my own house. I allowed my name to be used as a shield for corruption. I have disgraced the bench. I have disgraced the robe we both wear." He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a fountain pen. He held it up, staring at it as if it were a foreign object. "I will draft my letter of resignation to the Chief Justice first thing in the morning. I cannot continue to sit in judgment of others when I could not even see the guilt in my own son. It is over. My career is over." He looked broken. A titan of the legal world reduced to dust by the sins of his child. It would have been easy to let him fall. It would have been easy to accept his resignation and let the sterling name fade into infamy. But that was not justice. That was vengeance. And I was not there for vengeance. I walked over to him, stopping a few feet away. I looked him in the eye, ensuring he saw the respect I still held for his office, if not for his parenting. "Put the pen away, William." I said, my voice firm but quiet. He looked at me confused. "But, Your Honor, the scandal." "There will be a scandal," I interrupted. "The press will have a field day. Your name will be dragged through the mud because of what Bradley did. But you are not resigning." I took a step closer, my tone shifting from colleague to superior. "You are a brilliant jurist, William. I have read your opinions. I have cited your precedents. The judiciary needs minds like yours. We do not throw away 40 years of service because your son made criminal choices. Bradley is an adult. He is responsible for his own actions, not you. Guilt is not hereditary in this country." William stared at me, his eyes welling with tears he refused to shed. "But how can I sit on the bench after this? How can I look people in the eye?" "You will recuse yourself from his case, obviously," I said. "You will step back and you will let the system work. You will let the prosecutors do their job, and you will let a jury of his peers decide his fate. You will watch your son face the consequences of his actions without interfering, without pulling strings, and without resigning. That is the hardest thing a father can do. And that, William, is your penance. That is your redemption. Do not run away. Stay and prove that the law applies to everyone, even a sterling." William stood there, letting the words sink in. He straightened his back just a fraction. He nodded slowly, understanding the mercy and the severity of my judgment. "Thank you, Judge Banks," he whispered. "Thank you." I nodded once, turned on my heel, and walked out of the house, leaving him to face the silence alone. I stepped out of the heavy oak front doors and into the cool night air. The driveway, which had been filled with luxury cars and valet attendants just hours ago, was now a kaleidoscope of red and blue emergency lights. The silence of the wealthy suburb had been shattered by the static of police radios and the idling engines of government SUVs. It was a scene of total devastation for the Banks family reputation, but for me, it felt like the first breath of clean air I had taken in years. I walked down the stone steps, my heels clicking rhythmically on the pavement. The sound drew the attention of the agents who were securing the perimeter, but they did not stop me. They saw the badge on my belt and the steel in my eyes, and they stepped aside, parting like the Red Sea to let me pass. Tasha was standing by the back of the lead patrol vehicle. The handcuffs were tight around her wrists, and her immaculate white engagement dress was bunched up awkwardly around her waist as the officer prepared to help her into the back seat. She looked like a broken doll. Her mascara had run down her face in black rivers, and her hair was a tangled mess. When she saw me approaching, she stopped struggling. She went rigid. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment the sobbing stopped. She looked at me with a mixture of hatred and confusion, still unable to comprehend how the power dynamic had shifted so violently. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to scream an obscenity or beg for mercy one last time, but no sound came out. She was finally voiceless. I signaled the officer to wait. He nodded and took a step back, giving me a moment of privacy with the prisoner. I moved into her personal space, invading it just as she had invaded mine all night. I did not yell. I did not make a scene. I leaned in close until my lips were inches from her ear. I could smell the expensive perfume she wore, masking the scent of her fear. I wanted her to hear every syllable. I wanted these words to be the only thing she thought about while she sat in a holding cell waiting for her arraignment. "You always wanted to be the center of attention, Tasha," I whispered, my voice low and smooth. "You always wanted the biggest wedding and the most expensive ring and the envy of everyone in the room. Well, you got your wish. You are going to be on the front page of every newspaper in the state tomorrow. But before you go, I want to give you one piece of advice, a little tip from your big sister." I paused, letting the tension build. I saw her throat muscle spasm as she swallowed. "Next time," I said, my voice hardening into diamond, "before you ask someone to get on their knees and clean your shoes, make sure that person is not the one holding the key to your prison cell." Because frankly, Tasha Orange is not going to be your color. I pulled back and looked her in the eye one last time. I saw the realization crash into her. I saw the memory of her making me wipe the wine off her heel play out in her mind. I nodded to the officer. "Take her away." The officer placed his hand on top of her head and guided her into the back of the cruiser. The heavy door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in my bones. I watched through the reinforced glass as she slumped against the seat, her face disappearing into the shadows. The car put it into drive and slowly rolled down the driveway, taking the toxicity of my past along with it. I stood alone in the driveway under the flashing lights and finally checked the time on my platinum watch. It was getting late, but for the first time in a long time, I was right on time. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers slowly dissolve in my mind, replaced by the steady golden glow of the Washington, D.C. skyline. The memory fades, leaving me back in the present, standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse. The chaos of that night feels like a lifetime ago, even though the legal ripples are still being felt in the courts. The silence here is not heavy or awkward like it was in that dining room. It is the peaceful silence of earned success. I look down at the crystal glass in my hand, swirling the vintage Cabernet. The deep red liquid catches the light, reminding me of the wine Tasha forced me to wipe off the floor. But this wine does not taste like humiliation. It tastes like victory. It tastes like the 5-year sentence Tasha is currently serving in a minimum security facility in West Virginia. It tastes like the 12-year sentence Brad received for federal racketeering. And it tastes like the solitude of my mother, who now sits alone in a house she can no longer afford, waiting for phone calls that never come. I take a slow, deliberate sip, letting the warmth spread through my chest. People often ask me how I stayed so calm that night. They ask how I could stand there and let them insult me, let them treat me like a servant, let them strip away my dignity piece by piece without screaming in their faces. They wonder why I did not flip the table or throw the wine back at them the moment I walked in, but they do not understand the nature of true power. Screaming is for the weak. Screaming is for those who need to convince themselves of their own importance. Tasha screamed, Brad shouted, my mother wailed, and look where it got them. I turn away from the window, walking over to the marble island in my kitchen. My judicial robe hangs on the rack by the door, ready for tomorrow morning. The brass seal sits on my desk, not a toy but a heavy instrument of the law. The lesson I learned that night is one I carry with me every time I take the bench. The sweetest revenge is not found in a shouting match. It is not found in a dramatic scene or a physical fight. The sweetest revenge is silence. It is the quiet, relentless pursuit of excellence while your enemies are busy being loud. When they mock you, do not answer. Work. When they underestimate you, do not correct them. Work. When they try to bury you, do not dig yourself out with words. Dig yourself out with success. Build a fortress of competence so high that they have to crane their necks just to see you. Let them make the noise. Let them have their parties and their insults and their delusions. You just wait. You wait for the moment when the evidence is gathered and the verdict is ready. And then you do not need to scream. You simply let the gavel speak for you. I place the empty glass on the counter. The city lights twinkle outside, indifferent and beautiful. The case is closed, the record is sealed, and justice is served. This story reminds us that true power does not need to be loud. While Jordan's family focused on the appearance of wealth and status, they lacked the integrity to sustain it. Jordan endured their mockery not because she was weak, but because she possessed the quiet confidence of genuine success. The greatest lesson here is that you never need to prove your worth to those who are committed to misunderstanding you. Do not waste energy screaming to be heard. Instead, work hard in silence. Build a life so undeniable that your success becomes the only noise that matters. If you enjoyed watching Justice Be Served, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories of redemption and revenge. What would you have done if you were in Jordan's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.